Rashid Al Mahmoud Titumir.
Sustainable Development Goals, in short, SDGs, and the green transition. So the climate change has pushed the Bay of Bengal as a breeding ground of cyclones, as we know. About 5.5% of the cyclone storms with a wind speed greater than of 62 km per hour form in the Bay of Bengal, and about 1% of the global total of cyclone storms hit Bangladesh. And we have seen the frequency of cyclones. We can't really name. During the COVID, we have seen Iyas, we have seen Sitrang, and we are continuing facing this cyclone storms in the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea, and which are becoming intense and lasting longer due to climate change in the last 2 decades. Then, if you are really looking at the third pole, which is Himalayan and Hindu Kush region, we are witnessing rapid glacier lead to disasters related to natural hazards such as glacier collapse, glacier surging, glacial debris flow, and we have recently witnessed that how cloud burst has really washed away dams in Sikkim. Or we have witnessed just last couple of days in Dhaka city, which was average rainfall ranges between 160 millimeter to a level of 460 millimeter. In the last 45 years, sea surface temperature has risen by 0.2% centigrade to 0.3 degrees centigrade, and is projected to rise further by 2.2 degree to 3.5 degree centigrade by the end of this century. And then, if you are looking at with these rising tides of climate frequency and intensity, we do not necessarily see a direct causal relationship between climate change and armed conflicts or instances of political instability in the region, but yet the effects of climate change can cause existing social and economic fault lines to widen, increasing the potential for conflict. Bangladesh, India, Myanmar, and Thailand are among the world's top 10 states most vulnerable to natural disaster. How would that shift in Indo-Pacific region with the observable shift from the Atlantic would fear? Amidst this uncertainty and less of action and lot of talks, the world has already witnessed 27 rounds of political theater in the form of COP. And very soon we would be witnessing another one in December in Dubai. And as you have seen that the young generation is awfully disgusted, and so the people of, say for example, the island of Gabura in the vicinity of the largest contiguous mangrove forest in the world, Sundarbans, they have seen the tall talks in Glasgow. Gabura's people are not confident the actions that Glasgow has taken would really translate that into reality of having a resilient future. So we are now in inflection point with poly crisis. So the current cost of living crisis, climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, and pollution crisis. With the COVID-19 witnessing a K-shaped recovery between the countries and within the countries, in that context, we are also halfway to the deadline for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. But we are, as the current statistics suggest, leaving more than half the world behind. We are supposed to leave no one behind by 2030. The SDG progress report suggests that just 12% of the SDG targets are on track. Progress on 50% is weak and insufficient. Worst of all, we have stalled or gone into reverse on more than 30% of SDGs. Say, for example, in case of Bangladesh, in Dhaka division, we have witnessed, as the government data suggests, that there is an increase in poverty. Unless we act now, the 2030 agenda will become an epitaph for a world that might have been. So this is an existential planetary crisis, and time is of essence, and we have to act now. So in that context, the global leaders will meet in Dubai this year in December, and the agenda are more or less, for the sake of our discussion, because we have learned colleagues with demonstrated knowledge and track record of experience to shed light on 5 major issues that would feature the Dubai agenda. So the first, obviously, the global stocktake. At COP28, the governments are supposed to provide what they have done in terms of what is known as nationally determined contribution, in terms of really bringing down the target of 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade. So that's a crucial point we have to ponder over. The second, obviously, the mass talked about issues as we are discussing about the green transition. What is the kind of just energy transition we are witnessing right now? Where are we? Are we really going forward? Because as we see that fossil fuels are still heavily subsidized by the government, this approach is failing people, failing economies, and failing the environment. And we have witnessed, on the contrary, oil and gas giants are amassing historic profit and registering record windfall, while energy bills rise, and this has a dampening effect on the cost of living crisis. Simultaneously, with the Ukraine and war, we see also revert back to the fossil fuel. So, will there be any headway towards clean transition? Would that be something that would ensure equity and equality? And as we know that we have been talking about climate finance, at COP15, if you remember, that developed countries committed $1 billion per year by 2020 for developing countries. But this target has never been met. And the key word is additionalities of finance. So given that scenario, the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, the point was that they agreed for operationalization of the loss and damage fund. So how about it? How are we really having that in place? Where is the money? And how would the money be distributed? And then obviously global goal and adaptation. And will there be a global goal and adaptation framework in Dubai with equity priorities or share adaptation priorities? And last but not the least is about, we would be talking about food system with ongoing food insecurity and reducing levels of productive land. It is vital that leaders find a solution to ensuring equal access to healthy and nutritious food, keeping in mind that agriculture system emits huge amount of greenhouse gas and particularly the methane. So how do we move forward? So to talk about this, we have a fantastic panel. And now what we would do, they would be making a 5 minutes opening remarks, then we'll have a floor discussion of 15 minutes, and again they will have a 5 minutes each. So to initiate the discussion, we have Mr. Sardar M. Asaduzzaman, who is working as Assistant Country Representative of UNDP Bangladesh. He would guide us through the current scenario of reaching to the level of the desired level of 1.5 degrees centigrade. Mr. Asaduzzaman, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, respected moderator, and thank you very much to the organizer, Center for Governance Studies, for organizing this conversation for the second time. And I think it's a very good time-worthy arrangement, together with the participation of several country representatives. As the moderator mentioned about the status, and particularly focusing on the global stocktake, I'll be focusing on these specific areas. What is this stocktake, and where are we in terms of that? When we talk about global stocktake, then it comes what is this stocktaking about? So this global stock taking about is talking about, I mean, the reflection and taking the stocks of the progress of the commitment that was made in Paris Agreement in 2015 and the COP15. And in the Paris Agreement, Article 14 mentioned about this global stock taking. And then global stock taking will help the parties of the conference, I mean the government and the state parties, to have a reflection, where are we in terms of the progress or the commitment that we made in the Paris Agreement to keep the global warming or the temperature below 2 degrees centigrade and at least 1.5 degrees centigrade. So what we see since we started with the commitment and till to date and the years to come, in between we see a lot of turbulence. We see the two disruptions very recently. One is COVID, another one is war. And these disruptions are also part of the life that we have seen. And maybe in 2015, we did not have this disruption expected or planned while we set our target. But on the other hand, as we go along, our state parties also need to be very strictly maintained and determined how we can help to contribute in achieving that target. And as our moderator already mentioned, that nationally determined contribution is one tool, one plan, one guideline, one set of commitment that keeps the state parties to make sure that how they will contribute and make sure that Paris Agreement is adhered to. NDCs are mostly focusing on the mitigation areas. But we know not only mitigation, but adaptation is very important also to help to implement or achieve the Paris Agreement or the target. And in terms of these two modalities like adaptation and mitigation, in terms of the mitigation, we can think about like how we can monitor, how we can verify, how we can report. But in adaptation is very challenging area. So that is also an important area that we need to think about. Coming back to again the global stocktake. The global stocktake is now the report is being prepared, and then, as the moderator mentioned, that we are supposed to present this every 5 years in the COP, and in the upcoming COP in 28, there will the state parties will be presenting this global stock take. And then global stock take, already we have seen that a synthesis report has been published, and this synthesized report, as we foresee, we see that the commitment that we made in Paris Agreement, we are not really in line on that. Rather, we are far behind. And for this regard, we need to really rejuvenate, and we need to have a kind of waken up, not only the government, but also the private sector, civil society organization, and I would say particularly thrust on our individual life behavior and also lifestyle. And that is very important. And if on the global stock take, just to focus on the governance of this global stock take, it has 4 layers. And for this global stock take, as I said, it will happen like every 5 years. This is happening first time in the 2023, and 2028 there will be another one, and 2033 there will be another one. So the 4 layers is like conference of the parties. They will be responsible, they will have that meeting and the commitment to see what are the progress. And there are also another technical areas like subsidiary bodies of scientific and technological advice. That body and the subsidiary body of implementation has also role to make sure that to analyze and see the scientific based and data based report, how much we have really reflected, how much we have progressed. And also there another one that this SBSTA, as I said, subsidiary bodies for scientific and technological advice, and the subsidiary bodies of implementation, they will have a review and make sure that what is the progress and what is going on and how far we have really achieved or how far we have not. So following all these steps and layers, we feel that global stock take report will help us to see how much change, how much our direction or way forward need to be really revisited, redirected and changed to make sure that how much we can go ahead, by when, and if not, what to do. At the moment, the report that we have seen that if we really continue the contribution, the way we are moving now, by end of this century, the temperature will be 2.4 to 2.6 degrees centigrade, which is not really the target that we committed in the Paris Agreement. So that gives a signal or alert all the parties that we really need to think that how we can really revisit our planning, our steps towards that achieving the Paris Agreement. I stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Asaduzzaman, bringing, hammering the moot point about we are in a current state where if this continues, we would head towards 2.6 degree to 3 degrees Celsius, which our planet can't bear. So with that related area is, as you remember, there are a lot of discussion about phase down and phase out in Glasgow. And that discussion brings towards the understanding of just energy transition. And as we recall that these 7 late partnership, which they call Just Energy Transition Partnership with blended finance to help developing countries transition away from coal to greater energy mix. So where are we there? Secondly, what we are observing now, energy security has taken central stage these past years, partly due to the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on energy supply. And particularly in Europe, USA, this has focused minds away from accelerating renewable energy system and infrastructure to again to the fossil fuel. And we have seen recently, particularly in USA and UK, there has been a new lease of land for fossil fuel industries. And simultaneously, as I say, that every day major energy giants are making $1 billion profit. And we know the technology is there to decarbonize, and decarbonizing provides a unique opportunity to scale up renewable energy and clean hydrogen infrastructure. We also know about wind turbines, solar panels, electric cars, sustainable buildings, and low-carbon ships are central to a zero-carbon economy. But we should be equally mindful of Rio's major moot point, which is CBDR principle. So how do we make sure that there are a lot of talks about finance for transition, secondly, provision of technology, and there's common but differential responsibility with respective capacities. So given that equity and fairness, how are we faring? And to talk about that, we have Dr. Aryan Dihan, who is Senior Program Specialist, International Development Research Center, IDRC, Canada, based in Delhi. So over to Mr. Dihan.
Thank you so much, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to the organizers for this fantastic dialogue. I work indeed at Canada's International Development Research Center, where I work on a global program that is co-funded by the UK's Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, which supports research that help build countries and communities' resilience to climate change. And it's today my honor to share with you some thoughts on priorities for that just transition, where I focus more on the access to clean energy rather than the equally or perhaps even larger challenge than getting out of fossil fuels, which is key in Bangladesh as in many other countries. And as we all know, and the moderator said, and even yesterday's paper had at least 5 articles that showed us the daily impact that climate change is having. We know that the world is not meeting its climate commitments. I come from an OECD country, and I'm ashamed that we're not doing better. And a shout out to the young people. I think that our moderator also referred to that, to making it very clear to us that we're not living up to our commitments. And we know that the impact of this are not even though low-income countries have contributed least to climate change, they are affected most, and poor communities, indigenous community, and women are even more affected and bearing the brunt of the climate change impacts. The Asia region, including the Bay of Bengal, is critical to climate action because of compounding effects of geography, development, and population. Out of the top 10 countries most affected by disasters, 6 are located in the Asia-Pacific region, causing disruptions in food systems, economies, and so on. Annual average losses from natural and biological hazards in Asia and Pacific are estimated to be around 780 billion USD. I think it's a UNEP calculation, likely to be rising. And I think the stocktake is going to show that these estimates the current estimates are far higher than the previous ones. At the same time, the Asia-Pacific region is responsible for more than half of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, that includes China, but emerging economies like Bangladesh too will need to invest heavily in renewable energy resources, lest they end up with stranded assets. And as I said, a critical issue that I cover less here, and maybe we can come back to in the discussion. Key point that I would like to highlight is that climate and development challenges are interlinked. We cannot trade off climate action with poverty reduction or gender equality. Climate change disproportionately impact poorer groups, women, and those groups also have less access to climate and development finance. Public finance is needed for both. Engaging local communities is also key to solutions. And of course, there's the political economy aspect that most climate action will need broad-based support. In a recent paper published in the Academic Forum for the G20, we have detailed this issue for energy access. A very large number of people across the world, I cannot confidently speak to numbers in Bangladesh, but we have numbers globally, do not have access to reliable energy. Access to clean and decentralized energy is what my colleagues have called the golden thread. Clean and decentralized energy provide climate benefits, it would help productive capacity, for example, for small enterprises, and it would benefit poorer groups, and women in particular, including because access to energy could help reduce their unequal burden of household work. But despite these promises of clean energy, we find that globally, recently, the access has not been growing. The progress has clearly stagnated, despite the enormous progress and decline in price of solar, for example. And I know there's colleagues here that will speak to this much better than I can. And what we find from the literature and research is that it has been really hard to scale promising pilots, that the uptake has been harder than assumed, but also, and critically, that the finance, including blended finance, is falling far short of expectations and predictions. And I know that's also a topic colleagues will speak to. And I'd be very happy to elaborate on this, but allow me just to emphasize the main conclusions from the work we've done so far. First, the resources for needed climate action are falling far short, and there's an urgent need to ramp up global as well as national commitments. 1 minute. Thank you. Capacity for needed climate action also needs to ramp up, and we need innovative solutions. The third one is that with the enormous challenges we face, we simply cannot trade off climate action and poverty reduction and gender equality for moral as well as political economy reasons, as well as for implementation reasons, in fact. And for that, we need to ensure to strengthen mechanisms for access to finance, and also we need to make sure that we connect national planning that is struggling to get that access to the needs and the priorities of local communities. We need to build on local community strengths and community organizations, and to ensure persistent barriers that marginalized groups face are being addressed. Finally, as a funder of research, I would add that action-oriented research and evidence has a key role to play. We need a better understanding of how to cost the impact of climate change and plan investments. We need knowledge to innovate and ensure technological opportunities do work in specific contexts, and that local communities can access those. So finally, thank you for giving me the floor. And I very much hope that and trust that this conversation can help in that learning and collaboration that can promote this transition. Thank you again for the organizers and making me part of this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Han, to bring the intersectionality between development and climate change, and reminding us that we need to ensure that those who have contributed least to the problem are not those that suffer the most, which means that we have to talk about equity and equality. And simultaneously, we have to talk about the imperatives of a just transition of the workforce and creation of decent work and quality jobs, if we are to really move towards that level. Given that kind of a development dimension attached to it, which is required climate finance, because there is a dinner party at 8 p.m. and 6 of them came at 6 o'clock and had 60% of the dinner, and then rest came to the party and they are asking that let's share the dinner, meaning the carbon budget. So that's the situation we are. So there is a right to development. Simultaneously, I may not agree with the way these negotiations are progressing, because I would have seen that negative reduction would have been the best outcome in order to achieve the 1.5 degree goal. But having said that, this is something of unkept promises. If you really look at, in 2009 at Copenhagen, they said that the developed countries would mobilize 100 billion for adaptation financing by 2020. If we are to, for the sake of the argument, wouldn't take into factor in additionality, even by that standard, the funding stood at just around $83 billion. So that target was achieved. Then, as we know that there was a breakthrough in Sharm el-Sheikh about bringing the loss and damage element to it. But what we are not sure about is that how high income economies would really pressure to reform and capitalize international financial institutions such as the World Bank. As you know, the issues relating to the immediate past president of the World Bank, Mr. Malpass, who is climate skeptic, and so how there could be more money in climate efforts, not the loan element of it. So that's a additionality and no loan. So the second question with regard to the loss and damage is that these issues have been underlying climate finance discussion for a long time. So who is going to fund that and how this funding would take place, given that climate finance has a skewed process and there was no, rightly as mentioned earlier, that they have not been able to live up to the promise of equity and fairness. So to discuss this, he has been working in the climate field for a long time in Bangladesh and obviously working and interacting with the global climate change community. Mr. Arif Faisal, who is now currently working as a climate change expert in UNDP Bangladesh. So Mr. Faisal.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues and organizers and participants from various countries. I think before a start of these very contemporary issues, and this issue will be also important for upcoming conference of parties that will be held in Dubai this year in November. So before going to deep dive, I'd like to highlight a few issues. First of all, there was a promise from the global community to deliver $100 billion per year by the developed country. But the promise was not met. Only $83.3 billion was disbursed for both adaptation and mitigation. And secondly, there is also disparity between adaptation and mitigation. For adaptation, there was only $29 billion was disbursed, and for the mitigation, $49 billion. So you see how the world is unjust for allocation of the resource for adaptation and mitigations. And that is come actually the equity, fairness, justice, and the intergenerational equity is very important for climate change finance discussion agenda. Third of this thing, recently United Nations Environment Program, they have conducted a study and they find out that by 2030, all the developing country that need $300 billion. And by 50, all the developed country need $500 billion. But funding gap is huge. And very recently, another discussion come particularly for loss and damage associated with climate change. If you consider the slow onset event and the extreme event, slow onset event is actually the sea level rise and these types of event, and extreme event like extreme flooding, extreme cyclone, these are devastating for economy, society and the ecosystem. So how can we address this loss and damage? In the COP28 in the Glasgow, there was a discussion that a fund for loss and damage will be established. And that should be the beyond adaptation fund, because the mechanism for accounting and valuation method is not yet agreed by the global community. And there is no scientific consensus reached, particularly what is loss and damage and whether this is associated with climate change or whether there is a very clear attribution of climate change of loss and damage. That is why there is no formula for valuation, and still the discussion is ongoing, and still we are at the learning curve, because who will fund the loss and damage? How the loss and damage fund will come from? What is the criteria for addressing loss and damage? Which vulnerable country will access the loss and damage? So this is not yet decided. And you know, there was lots of discussion happen since after COP13. So in COP13, there was a mechanism set. We called it Warsaw International Mechanism. That mechanism discussed about risk transfer. And later in COP25 in Madrid, Santiago Network was formed. And later, there was a risk transfer mechanism like Fiji Clearinghouse risk mechanism was also adopted. And still, This is one of the contentious issues that will be discussed in COP28 in Dubai. But many countries have already contributed, pledged, and that is started from a Scotland government. They have provided £2 million, particularly for research and capacity building in developing country. And many countries like Denmark, Sweden, Austria, even World Bank has also pledged, and about $300 million is pledged so far. But what will be the monitoring and reporting framework, and how to ensure easy and fast financing assistance for risk management, rehabilitation, recovery, immediate case transfer, and the social protection, and how can we address the early warning system. But many economists and scientists purport that how can we actually quantify this, and how can we raise the resource. Many scientists and economists propose that we can collect adaptation levy through international air passengers or maybe from international tourists because of their footprint during the travel. And also there is also debt relief because lots of developing country is under the debt burden. So this is the mechanism, and the discussion is still ongoing, and particularly vulnerable 20 and most vulnerable country is raising the issue because there is a equity, fairness and justice issue on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. And last point is very important. How do we organize money? Should we go and travel into the innuendos of the innovative finance, or should we be traveling to the fiscal processes which provides different types? There are many ideas coming from Tobin tax to different taxes. So that really allows the financing to be ensured, and simultaneously he underscored a vital point about how do we have MRVs, monitoring reportable variable indicators, because these are clearly important, because there is always a tendency, as we have known for years and decades, that promise of 0.7% of gross national income was never met. And then we have this. So, and while we are talking about this, then obviously there is a requirement for adaptation, particularly in view of this poly crisis. Look at, we have not done anything. People of the Gabura is really the victim of it. Secondly, we have not done anything about it. Our Bay of Bengal is choked with plastic pollutions. We have not done anything, but our Sundarban is at stake. So how do we adapt ourselves? And secondly, also most importantly, how do we bring ourselves from these constructive ambiguities of the lawyers, phraseologies? Because as you have seen, that it is mechanism, it is targets, it is goal. So to talk about that and from the field, and particularly bringing the gender dimension into the discussion, we have with founder and director of Cobarnain Initiative in India, Ms. Ambika Viswanath. So, Ms. Viswanath.
Thank you to the moderator, and thank you also to the organizers for putting together what is a very important discussion and a panel topic. I'm going to touch a little bit upon what has already been said by some of the speakers, in that I'm going to bring a little bit of a gender angle to this, but also a little bit of the local angle to all of this, right? What is happening at COP, what has happened for 28 years, these are, they're happening in different cities around the world, oftentimes sitting in our places in Dhaka. I live in Mumbai. Before coming here, a lot of people said, there's a lot of traffic in Dhaka. I said, I live in Bombay. I know what traffic means, right? But we don't always understand what they're doing in all of these cities, talking about COP, talking about, big global goals, big numbers like we need 300 billion for something. Like these are really big numbers. They don't always trickle down in terms of understanding, in terms of research, in terms of awareness. Dr. Han talked about the importance of research. And so what does this actually mean when we think about it from our daily livelihoods, our daily perspectives? And I wanted to sort of little bit touch upon that. Just for context, because we've been throwing around some big numbers over here, right? 300 billion is what we need over the next decade. 29 billion was already spent. Just for a little bit of context, for those who might not have known, Twitter was bought by Elon Musk for 44 billion, right? We need 300 billion by the end of this decade for certain adaptation needs. 44 billion to 300 billion, right? So that's a little bit of context I thought might make sense, especially for all the young folk who are sitting here and might be wondering what Twitter was bought for. What does this mean, right? Adaptation. What does it mean when we say measurement, reporting, and variables? What does it mean when we say targets need to be set? Yes, mitigation is important, but mitigation is no longer going to get us where we need to get to. We are already in this situation of climate being a risk multiplier. Our cities of Dhaka and Mumbai and around the world are facing whatever it is that they said we were going to be facing. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen 1 week or 1 month later. It's already happening today, right? And so what is it that we can do on a regular basis? One, that is what adaptation at your local level means. Do I need to use a little bit less? Do I need to spend a little bit less? Do I need to buy a little bit less? All of these things we need to think about. How is our lifestyle going to be changing? Sure, all of that seems very small, but all of that adds up to a certain larger goal as well. But the other side of adaptation is also environmental security. How can we positively use our environmental influences towards being able to reach those adaptation and then possibly those mitigation goals as well, right? Nature-based solutions. There are some amazing things that have already happened in our region. How can we use those more effectively to reach those goals that we are thinking about, so that perhaps all of these large numbers are a little bit easier to understand? How do we use our Sundarbans to be able to be effective carbon sinks? How can we use, I mean, we have Sundarbans that we are sharing between India and Bangladesh. How do we use our rivers positively, not only as a resource to be able to use, abuse, and then, think about that we don't have to worry about it down the line in the future? What are the kind of nature-based solutions that we can learn from our ancestors? How do we use the indigenous knowledge that exists in our countries, in our regions, for our regions, but also for the rest of the world that might not have this indigenous knowledge that we have, that is really amazing? And then, of course, there's that question of gender, right? Women and other vulnerable populations, whether we talk about like the poorer communities, the coastal communities, the farming communities, these are the most affected when it comes to climate events, when it comes to climate being a risk multiplier. But these are also the communities that hold some of the best knowledge. Can we understand this knowledge? Can we package it? Can we use it? Can we take it elsewhere when it comes to the policy makers, when it comes to the financiers, when it comes to organizations like this and events like this? Can we put forth a little bit more of that knowledge so it can be used in a much more effective manner? And can we bridge then the fact that all of this knowledge already exists and all of these policies are getting made, but they are both happening very separately? How do we bridge all of that knowledge, right? Adaptation is all about all of these things. It's not just one or two of these things, but it's all of this coming together. I'll just, do I have a minute or am I out of time? Yeah, okay, but I'm just going to say that mitigation, financing, yes, we need to do all of that. But without all of us doing the adaptation side of it in a much more collective, holistic fashion, that mitigation is going to get us only to a certain place, and that's about it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vishwanath, for underscoring that adaptation is localized, but what is really required is to reflect the local conditions with participation of the people, reflecting the need of the people, and translating those into policy metrics, while obviously to reflect that to have an accountable process that we need to come up with this and meeting this target metrics and indicators. Thank you for that. This is a double-edged sword that we would be discussing right now. As we witness that there is a insecurity in food, millions go hungry despite the fact that we have a overproduction of it. And the food system, as you all know, is one of the main drivers of climate change, contributing almost a third of the greenhouse gas. And if you really look at the current method of meat production, which is mostly taken by the industrial rich countries, is leading to increasing levels of methane. And what is problem with the methane is that methane is a short-lived climate pollutant, and which can warm the atmosphere 80 times faster than the carbon dioxide. So how do we deal with this issue of millions going hungry, and simultaneously there is a requirement for shifts and intervention in terms of nutrition, dietary shifts, adaptation, and mitigation work plans. So we have Mr. Emmanuel Antui Akota. He is from Ghana. It's good that we have someone from the continent. And he would be speaking about, Mr. Akota would be speaking about this huge challenge of, because the COP would be talking about a food system approach. So Mr. Akoto.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, and I would also like to thank Zila and the entire team for putting together such a wonderful program. I bring you greetings from Ghana, a small country in West Africa, about 30 million people, and I'm very privileged to be here, I must say. So I'm also happy that you throw a light on food systems, because more often than not, the agriculture sector receives less attention when it comes to climate change. I think we've focused a lot more on industrial pollution, also transport. But then, like you rightly put it, agriculture contributes 25%, almost 30% to to greenhouse gas emissions. So you are talking about livestock, food production, forestry, land usage, fisheries. Livestock alone contribute about 16.5% of methane gases. And climate change, as we all rightly know, it's really affecting the entire global food chain systems. According to the Food Agriculture Organization, almost 30% of the global population last year, that is 2.4 billion people, were food insecure. Another 3.2 billion people could not afford a healthy diet. And like we know, a lack of a healthy diet has cascading effects on wellness. We now see a rise in non-communicable diseases, obesity as well, and also malnutrition in a lot of countries in the global south, and also in many African countries as well. I will work directly a lot with, in the agricultural sector, we promote the use of solar power irrigation systems. And really, when interacting with the farmers, you see how climate change is affecting their yield. When their yields are affected, it leads to a low standard of living, because now they are receiving low incomes. And obviously, if your standard of living is impacted, it also has other ramifications on the family. And so when you go deep down at a grassroots level, climate change is really, really affecting the livelihoods of the normal farmer. We also seen a lot of foreign trawlers across the oceans. A lot of foreign trawlers in Africa, I don't want to mention any country, doing illegal fishing. And as a result, it's depleting our oceans, and at the same time also impacting the livelihood of our fisher folks. So that is also a very important thing to look at. And another area to also really look at is the fact that Africa receives less than 2% of the global investments in renewable energies, given the fact that we have 40%, of natural resources. It's such a bizarre that we only receive 2%. We have a lot of natural resources, wind, sun, bio-waste. All of these things can be harnessed to reduce the effect of of greenhouse gas emissions. And then another thing that is also very, very, very important is the fact that in Ghana, we are having a problem. I just want to bring it down to my country level, what is called the illegal mining galamsey. A lot of farmers have now given their farms to people to do illegal mining. It's all because of the fact that they are not receiving the yield that they need to receive, the weather pattern, they're not getting the rain that they need. And because of that, again, low food productivity, low food supply in the system. We are importing food from our neighbors, and as a result, leading to a high rise in cost of living. Basic foods that would cost like 10 cents are now costing like $1 and all of that. And so the effects of climate change in our countries are real, and I believe that this forum would give us a platform to discuss or raise certain issues, to come up with innovative ideas and solutions on how to reduce global or reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the food sector. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Akota. I have not done a good service by really restricting them into 4-5 minutes because of their vastness of knowledge, both gained out of their understanding, working with the people as well as working at the international level. My apologies to my fellow panelists. But Mr. Akoto brings out a very important point. Yes, we live in an unequal world, but how about these countries which are victim of climate change, but they themselves are promoting fossil fuels or proliferation of nuclear energy, at the cost of which are really protector of their biodiversity as well as the climate, natural wall against climate change. So how do you really do about it, and what is the role of the citizenry? That's a good question he brings out, as well as those of invasive species in the fishing case or in case of extractive industry. He brings home those points. Those are really important points. Now I'll open the floor for your discussion, and we won't be doing it more than 10 to 15 minutes. My apologies again for restriction, because we want to make sure that we started at 6 and we finish, because we were allocated 70 minutes and we would be within that timeline. So the organizers would allow us additional amount of time, like in football, sports. If there is a technical difficulty, so that would be added to us.
Mr. Chairman, you are very right. You said that you have done injustice to these experts. We are also deprived of their knowledge and wisdom. We've just learned a little bit. This is not my cup of tea. I'm just a layman. I just wondering, the climate change and human rights are being interlinked. I think UN has taken this case, and the UN Human Rights Council has taken up this case, and they are saying that human rights are involved here, like right to your healthy life, clean water, right to good food, right to good health, right to good living, lower order needs, so to say. Now, my point is, UN cannot really impose that on the national governments. Like, I'll take the case of Bangladesh. Our courts are issuing orders to the to resuscitate this Balu River, Turak River, Budiganga River, but then court orders are being violated. Now, that could be a good game changer, especially our Turak River and Balu River, those are just destroyed biologically. Now, what is the way out? Bangladesh has otherwise signed the Human Rights Covenant, but things are not happening on the ground. At least, as you said, locally, we should be more adept. So what are your suggestions for that? Thank you.
Next opinion or comments or question?
I have a question.
Okay, let her.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the floor. So in reference to the adaptation strategy to fight back climate change, this year during June, if I think all of us are aware of this, that due to extreme heat, primary school was off for about a week due to government decision. So due to that 1 week closure, students already experiencing a learning loss, which we already are suffering a lot from this learning loss after pandemic. So that was an adaptation strategy from government, which actually resulted in learning loss for a week. So what adaptation strategy do you suggest here as well? Like, that's also an adaptation strategy, but it's not working how we thought it could be. So, yeah, so thank you.
Okay, so in terms of regional practices, Ms. Ambika has said that we should practice in local levels. So my question is, when do we start pointing the fingers at the billionaires? When do we start pointing the fingers at the multimillionaire football players and rugby players and Americans who are using jet every day, who are using fossil fuels every day? Why do we keep looking at inwards instead of outwards? Instead of looking at the free market economy that is causing us this much problem, that it is now going over the 2 centigrade level of climate change. Why are we always trying to bring ourselves into this question? When do we start pointing at the billionaires? When do we start pointing at the big companies that are being the most polluters? That's my question.
Please.
Okay. I'm Shadun Kumar Das. I work with Frederica Stiftung as program advisor. So I have a question, like many times we hear from our political decision maker that we need development and it should be prioritized probably by the cost of the climate and environment. And when we'll be there as a developed country, then we will think about our environment and climate. So in this context, if it is, then what would be your response? Because you are the panelists from different continents, so, and also you are experts. So is it the right approach that our policy decision makers should have? Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thanks for a very interactive discussion among the panelists, as well as thanks to the convener of this session. I have 3 questions actually. In the COP15, the developed countries, they like to award $100 billion to the developing countries. But is there any clause or something to compel the developing countries to give this money to the developing countries? Because up to 2023, actually they are not giving the money to the developing countries. So I like to know, is there any clause or is there something that might the COP can compel them, or even can compel them to give that money regularly or something like that? Secondly is, actually, the countries we have like Bangladesh, like India, we have very little resources on energy. Regarding energy resources, we are in many cases, we are dependent on coal. But we are very less polluter in the world. And if we follow the COP regulations, we have little coal or something like that, little energy which is not a good or not a green energy. But all the banks now they stop to give the money for constructing the coal plant. So these are the things actually now we are in. If we are following or like to follow to the COP, then we are at the brink of the energy crisis, and we are in the problem in our own energy actually. But we are contributing very less to the global context. And thirdly, I like
please,
to
please, it has to be brief.
Yes, one. There is very clearly mentioned the green energy. In the green energy, there is a lot of technology developed, and it is going on. And it is completely mentioned in the SDG, as well as in other, the transfer of the energy. But still, it is not smooth for us, for the developing countries, to take the energy very easy from the developing country. What is the opinion from the panel?
Okay, thank you, thank you. So what we are going to do, we have, if I have taken note, I don't want to say that I have taken note judiciously, but there are questions and I will come with these questions. The panelists may opt for responding to everything, every question, or they may answer selectively, but they would get maximum 4 minutes because we are running out of time. So there are questions about human rights and climate change. Obviously, there is a recognition of human rights in both UNFCCC negotiation as well as the recently concluded Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Then there are discussion about COVID-17 and the relationship with zoonotic diseases and that resulting into loss of education. So how do you see those ecosystem and what is the way out? Then there are discussion about carbon footprint, carbon financing, energy transition, phasing out of coal, and lastly but not the least important issue is the systemic issue about the abuse of market economy and market power. So what I would do, I would start from my extreme right and would finish with my good friend Mr. Eskaton. So Dr. Dehan, please.
Thank you. I hope that extreme right was a geographic indication and not a political one. Thank you for all the questions, and I'll try to take less time than 4 minutes to answer, because 4 minutes is not enough. And I think the one thing I would say to the gentleman asking the question on human rights, I didn't mention human rights, but the interlinkage of climate and SDG action, and of course the SDGs are based on a human rights framework, and that should absolutely continue to underlie that. In terms of the action that we need, and I very much appreciate the young man that mentioned when we're going to look at the polluters, and when there's nobody that I hate more than Elon Musk for not only buying Twitter instead of using, but also ruining Twitter, right? It's like there's so much money that goes to waste, and I wish I had better instruments of doing something about it. I think the key thing is that we need multiple action. The G20 came up as a new framework, and India had great successes there, but it didn't come out with new commitments on the things that we really need. So we don't have a multilateral framework, even in the multiple faceted that is driving this. And the only thing I can think of is that we need action at all levels, right? We need to continue to argue for more funding for the things that we need. We need to continue, arguing and help working with the governments to increase the action that they have. Government public investments across the world are in low-income countries are way too low as a percentage of the GDP, and that needs to increase to make the investments that are needed. And finally then, at the same time, to make sure that those national actions linked to the action of local communities. And I think the issue of access to finance runs straight across that. There's not enough money available. Private finance is not forthcoming at not nearly as much as was hoped for, or certainly not as was needed. And then the little money that's left in that doesn't go to the countries that need it the most, the sectors that need it most, the community need it most. So at all those levels, we need to continue to chip away at what is really an urgent need at a time that it's increasingly hard to get the global commitment to those common goods.
Thank you, Dr. Dihan, for keeping the time. Now I invite Mr. Asaduzzaman to answer the question that has been raised.
Thank you for giving another round of floor. The range of question has been asked, and I would say there are a couple of questions which is the $1 million question. $1 million question means this a long issues are there, and that also actually needs a kind of longer time to discuss and responding those. However, in broader terms, within 4 minutes, my point would be like we feel that these range of questions are coming, and we see the commitment that has been made in global arena by the global leaders. Bringing all those parties in common agreement should be also considered as a progress. And one thing is like, as I was talking about, is the stock taking, global stock take. The report says like, in this current phase, if we move on, then the temperature will be 2.4 to 2.6 by end of this century. While the report also said that if we did not have this Paris Agreement, then by the end of the century, the temperature would have been 3.7 to 4.8 degree. So, if we think in other way around, progress are happening, but maybe not at the expected level. So, we need to really think again and further accelerate our whole initiative, not in a country level, but also we need to think about international collaboration, and particularly this type of conversation and dialogue I consider is a good way forward. However, I just want to also put another suggestion and recommendation to the organizer, as we are discussing among ourselves. When we talk about like Indo-Pacific, or we talk about the SDGs as a whole to move forward, we need to make sure that climate change impacting or the SDGs achievement or the SDG goal achievement action plan has also varies from country to country and the geographical locations. Which I want to particularly mean is like, there are island countries, small island and developing states, we know SIDS, they call them like Fiji, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, and Tuvalu, Kiribati. These type of islands has a different level of vulnerability, while landlocked country or the countries, non-island countries has a different vulnerability. So this global collaboration and international cooperation is very important in terms of moving this global agenda forward. And last point I want to mention is that strengthening institution is very critical. And these institutions should be like national level, state level institution, and as well as global institutions. And in doing so, like I consider that youth as an emerging power and force, and those youth group really can be a kind of change agent, which we can see that they started raising voice, they started boycotting like environmental polluter, they boycotting like pollutant, the product which are polluting our environment. So this is also one kind of step forward. I feel that can make a change as well. And the last point is, in terms of the adaptability or mitigation or environment or climate action, in my considerations, we need to have both things. One is protective, another one is preventive. I mean, the protective that we have discussed a lot, in terms of preventive, we need to really impose tax or penalties who are really the polluter. And those penalty or demerits can be transformed into further investment in the environment or green investment or like that. With this note, I stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Asaduzzaman. Now I request Ms. Viswanath
for her final remarks.
Thank you. Just to question that was, I think, a little bit directed at what I had said. I think there is enough, okay, maybe not enough, but there is plenty of finger pointing already. The fact that we have come to a certain point shows that there are some countries that recognize that there is a historic responsibility. Is it enough? No. Is that all that we are going to leave, then say, okay, we'll only do finger pointing and then everything will course correct? That's not going to happen. We have to be a little bit realistic as well. We can continue on that vein. We can hold the historical emitters to a certain standard. We can talk about a better form of financing. There was also that question about, are there any legal means when it comes to actually achieving, being able to extract that money? Not really, but there are countries that are holding themselves accountable. Let that continue. But alongside of that, we have to also learn better adaptation methods. Countries like India, Bangladesh, and several others, I mean, we're talking about the Pacific Islands, we're talking about what's happening in Africa. These are countries that are developing. They should be allowed to develop the way they would like to develop, but they shouldn't be developing in a way that perpetuates another set of problems, another cycle 25 years down the line. So can we do a better job of developing that the other set of countries, in the Western Hemisphere, in the Western world, didn't do? Can we do it better so that we are not creating another cycle going forward? That's what I mean by ensuring that our development is in a much more sustainable fashion and adapting to what is already existing today. It's not one or the other. It has to happen in tandem. It has to happen in parallel. And the best kind of adaptation we can do is learn from what we already know, that the knowledge that we have within our countries, and sort of integrate all of that in a better way. On the last point about, the loss of education, I don't think anybody has an answer whether that was the best adaptation strategy to COVID. COVID was a very unique situation that we are facing, and I think a lot of countries did whatever they could in that moment. There is some learning from that. Is that something that countries will do in the future? Again, we don't know. But is there a learning that we can use then to do something better? Assuming, hopefully not, but say a situation like that arises again, hopefully then countries will not perpetuate that cycle again. But I don't think there's an easy way to answer that question to the young lady who asked about the education. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think one question is not addressed. What we are doing, what we have done, particularly to addressing the climate change. In Bangladesh, actually, UNDP supported the government for preparation of National Adaptation Plan. We have the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. We have the nationally determined contribution that is updated in 2021. We have conducted to greenhouse gas inventory in the major sector, and UNDP also supported Bangladesh government for preparation of this thing. In fact, Bangladesh is a global leader on adaptation, I should say, because Bangladesh do lots of things. And Bangladesh is one of the countries who first allocated resource for addressing adaptation from own revenue generation, own revenue budget. That is $300 million allocated for and formed the Climate Change Trust Fund. And after that, World Bank come forward, they have dedicated a fund and $190 million, they formed the Bangladesh Climate Change Resilience Fund, and many countries actually now preparing for addressing adaptation and providing own revenue budget and doing the blended finance, not only in adaptation, but if you see where the country, we have 500 millions of solar home system. We are now converting the all diesel run, solar irrigation system to the solar irrigated pump. And if you consider about the industrial sector, out of top 10 green factory, 8 is actually situated in Bangladesh. So I think Bangladesh is one of the pioneer country, but particularly for accessing the finance, we are a bit lag behind because the adequate and predictable finance is not there. And another question I think I should address that there is a lots of discussion in the COP, but why the most vulnerable countries is still facing the problem? The problem is actually lies with the free riding problem, because environmental goods is the free riding. That is why is the free riding nature of developed country. Second thing is that in the negotiation, global negotiation process, no one country have right to take the decision. So it's the big global forum, and every country is participating as a party, and there is a collective consensus-based decision making is required. That is why, which is very complex thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Faisal. Now my last panelist, Mr. Eskaton.
All right, thank you very much. The last few words I want to, leave on the floor, it's about the adoption of sustainable practices in the food systems that can help mitigate or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I think, first of all, the use of solar power irrigation systems is very, very crucial in ensuring that farmers have, regular or, access to water all the time. This would greatly increase yields and reduce food insecurity, and would also lead to a drastic reduction in food pricing. Also, the use of solar PV in food processing, I think, is something that we have also seen work with the stakeholders that we work with. Now they pay far less in terms of their electricity bills, and it translates into the pricing of their produce. Also a reduction in pricing as well as improving the quality. Yeah, and then also intercropping. I think that intercropping can help reduce land usage by growing, different kinds of plants on the same space of land. And then also cover cropping as well can also help manage soil erosion as well as planting of trees. And then lastly, I think that there's a lot of food wastage, like you alluded to. In some part of the world, there's a lot of food wastage, and in some part of the other world, there's a lot of malnutrition. And so using cold chain solutions along the entire agriculture value chain from farm to the shop would also help reduce food wastage and improve food security globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eskaton. I'm really pleased to have been part of this panel, because within 45 minutes, they have really provided you much thoughts in this space with their usual eloquence and brilliance. I'm really grateful to having this panel. I would not dare to have a summary of the discussion, but I would highlight 3 points. The first being that the moving from unkept promises to walking the talk. As our panel highlights, that there are promises made, and we are heading towards the 28th round of the discussion. And the climate is warming, but action is lagging behind. So that's number one prerogative. The second point that I want to highlight, from the planetary emergency to a livable planet, because we cannot and we must not leave an earth that is unlivable for our future generations, because we are witnessing a metabolic rift where our ecosystem is in tatters, where our earth is almost in emergency. So it is necessary that we act to have a livable future for the future generation. And the third, which is most important point, that we need to move from this extractive participation to that of a inclusive participation. Because what is needed and what is recognized, that we need to move towards a whole of the government, whole of the society approach. But what is lacking is that the political settlement is not allowing the government to be accountable to the citizen, who are mostly affected by the climate change? And how do you ensure an accountable system that serves the humanity is a question that has to be really reversed if we are to achieve the sustainable development goals, because we have seen with the COVID pandemic how the progress that has been made over 30 years were reversed, and we are in current state of sustainable development goals where the key targets are really out of touch. The question is that we are on the fork in the path. Are we willing to travel to the path that less traveled? And that's a question. With that question, I end here the panel. Thank you for being with us. It was wonderful to having this conversation. Let's continue the conversation, and more importantly, let's have an action to the planetary emergency that we are in. Thank you so much.
Thank you, respected guests. I would like to end this session with an apology. I might seem a little bit agitated organizing this whole thing. I haven't slept in 30 hours. I'm very sorry. But you would, please, if you would come right up to the stage, we would like to take a photograph of all of you. And thank you very much to the moderator for finishing in time. And I would like to tell all the guests we have tea and coffee refreshments right outside for today. If you would.